I'm going to record. Okay, Kevin, would you like to start? Introduce yourself and what brings you to the meeting and what would you like to get out of the meeting?
Sure. My name is Kevin Howard, and I am a climate risk senior analyst for a major bank here in the United States. I am here representing myself, and everything I say is certainly my opinion. I don't speak on behalf of the bank, but certainly this has become a focus in my professional career and certainly in my personal life. Climate change, climate risk, and how we can mitigate and realign our economy and our way of living with the ecology that sustains us. And so I'm so happy to be here to talk to each of you and to share ideas, to hear ideas on where we are in terms of addressing climate change and what solutions could be that can we discuss and then bring into our own lives for how we can restore sustainability to the way we live today in the modern world. So that's why I'm here, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kevin. Dalen, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Dalen Bailey, and I've known Barney for a while now. He and I worked on the project together when he was first getting it really up and running in its current form. My background is I have a PhD in education theory and practice, learning theory, just like how we change our minds. Right? Like how we think and act differently. And I've just had a pretty, few decades career in doing both a lot of large scale institutional change around education, like how we change institutions to help people think differently and to support not just thinking differently, but kind of the better version of how we can think, right? Like how we can work collectively, how we can work collaboratively, and how we can build a more just, sustainable society. And, and Barney and I crossed paths at one point, and I was really interested in what he was doing, and he invited me to work with him on it. And so we've been working together for about 3 years.
Okay, great. Well, I'm Barney Wong. I'm I could say I started a project called One Tiny Drop. And the purpose of One Tiny Drop is to work to connect the symptoms in the exterior to the causes in the interior that are often hidden and is often in the place of consciousness. I started this project, it will be 3 years in May. And what I would like my intention for this meeting is so that we all can have an understanding our perspective and whether our perspective can gel together as a composite and understand the problem from a composite level. What I like to get from the meeting is to have just a more understanding, a more solid understanding as to how do we see the problem differently and how can we use that difference in bringing that composite lens. Sounds good? Yeah.
Sounds great.
So Kevin and I, we belong to a group by the Baha'i faith called Meaningful Conversations. And I think Kevin has been on it for almost 2 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm a little over 2 years now. Exactly.
Yeah.
On and off.
And I was on the group for 3.5 to 4 years. I think it's coming up 4 years. Yeah. So that's how Kevin and I know about each other. And also there was an ad hoc group called the Men's Group. And Kevin did not participate in the first men's group meeting where I put together a workshop called Eating Meat and the dissonance of eating meat. And so that workshop built out from there. And right now, I'm at a place where I can offer a workshop or at least the beginning structures of a workshop that addresses climate change. So Kevin, why don't you share with us this new role that you have and how it meets with your own personal inspirational place in you?
Sure. I've been a business and commercial banker for almost 30 years. And my approach to how I look at credit risk and credit in general has been to use applied economics and the law, because I have my undergraduate degree in economics and my graduate degree in law. And so through that passion for economics and helping businesses grow and financing businesses of medium to small level, I came across, I'm sensitive to things that impact the global economy, macro, micro, or an externality. And through that work, I discovered years ago that we have this problem in climate, and I became fascinated by it, and fascinated by the fact that nothing is happening, even though very thoughtful people are working on it and trying to engage in solutions. And so, as a part of my spiritual growth as an individual, I had been looking to reconcile what I do. I mean, I made a living providing financing and financial products. While that has some purpose, that wasn't in alignment with my sense of highest purpose from a spiritual perspective. And so I wanted to shift my career more in alignment with what would serve my highest purpose. How could I serve a greater cause? And climate change and climate science became the thing. It is finally my industry is starting to acknowledge that there's a problem here, that they're not going to be able to engage in business as usual and ignore it. And so that gave me the opportunity to take the years of experience that I had been building up personally in this space to apply it to professional opportunities, because there are very few bankers who have any background in climate science and climate change, or what have you. So when the bank that I work for was standing up their climate risk unit, I took the opportunity to apply for a position, and because of the background and experience and the knowledge built over years, I was able to qualify for it. And so what does that role do? It is incumbent on me to participate in setting, and I'll be candid, I'll say the bank, even though I don't speak on behalf of the bank, but it's US Bank, and it's the fifth largest bank in the country. And I'm engaged in I'm participating in setting what US Bank's climate policy is going to be. How are they going to participate in being a part of the solution or a part of the problem? And currently we are writing what's called the climate risk framework, how the bank will manage that risk across the entire exposure of the bank. And integral in that is a series of commitments that you see that lots of businesses are making. So US Bank in November made a commitment to reduce their finance emissions to net zero by 2050. Okay, great. Okay. They also made another commitment to increase environmental finance by $50 billion before 2030. And then they made a series of other commitments. And so my role is to take these commitments, these public statements, and work internally in the organization to develop strategy, risk mitigation approaches that execute those public statements in a transparent way, in a way that we can disclose to anyone who would want to know what is US Bank doing in this space. And for that reason, it feels much closer to my sense of purpose. I believe that I can bring the knowledge that has not penetrated into this industry, into my industry, front and center. And what they choose to do with it is still their prerogative. But at least I'm participating and bringing it to their attention and seeing where they're going to be in this.
Great, great. So in this new capacity, what are your greatest challenges and obstacles that you think having this discussion could, you know, open up solutions or new pathways that you feel that what do you encounter in this capacity that you're looking for solutions or answers?
Well, the rub of the matter is because people are aware of solutions that are being discussed. They are aware of the notion of decarbonization. They're aware of the idea of shifting to an energy, a source of energy that doesn't use fossil fuels. Okay. From the financial services industry, that is about as profound, as transformative, as radical a solution as you could possibly have, right? I mean, and so the burden that I find is, in order for any prudent lender who's focused in on safety and soundness to engage in an endeavor of that magnitude that involves that level of change, they have to absolutely understand that they have no other choice. And the problem is getting them to understand that they have no other choice. I mean, they don't want to hear it. So they're already making so much money doing it the old way, right? And you're talking about a change that they can't even see through the other side. What does that look like? And yet if we don't bring these changes about within the next 10 years, right? The impact, in terms of the worst impacts, you know, it's unthinkable. It's unthinkable. And we'll get into that into this conversation. So what I'm looking for is, and that, that's my primary focus, is how do you cross that Rubicon with them to say, no, you do smell smoke. The house is on fire. Right, right. And this is not the moment to figure out how is this going to affect me.
Yeah.
This is the moment to say, what do we
Yeah.
do to save the house?
Yeah.
We only have one, right? And so I will glean anything out of this conversation that would help in the
Yeah.
argument, because that's my challenge.
So the framing that I'm hearing is that the challenge is, how do we get the message? We're going to take a haircut or we're going to lose the head.
It's more like a close shave. It's a close shave.
Yeah. we're gonna take a haircut or we're gonna lose the head completely. Yeah. So
Exactly.
so it's not we're gonna avoid having a haircut. We're gonna take a haircut. The question is, how do we want to manage the haircut in a way that we don't lose the head?
Exactly. I mean, the question I've put to senior leadership, because it's such a small group. So the difference between me and the CEO is like 3 lines. I mean, we're 2 lines away from the chief risk officer. We're at the top of the house, right? Because this is such a specialty concept. And so the question is, okay, we made this public commitment. You want to go to net zero by 2050, but is that going to be a 2.5 degrees Celsius world? Or is that going to be a 1.5 degrees Celsius world?
Yeah.
Because I can tell you this much, the difference between those two is going to be so profound,
Right.
that anyone who's living through it, the one thing they're going to say to themselves is, what did I do to make sure, did I do everything I could to stop that from happening?
That's right. Yeah.
And so I'm telling to my leadership, I said, it's that bad. I mean, we're talking about 1 billion people, who will have to migrate, and most of them will die in the migration.
Yes.
I mean, Europe is turned almost upside down from 1 million Syrians, let alone, let alone 1 billion people.
There's an upside in this. There's an upside. I mean, there's an upside in this moment. And that is that the news is pervasive now, right? The weather has gotten worse. Circumstances have gotten worse. People, more and more, millions and millions of people are experiencing these impacts. I mean, that heat dome last year was chilling, right? It was absolutely, I talked to Barney about this. My animal body knew, right? And so even if you weren't here even if somebody's not here, if they're elsewhere, it is all over the place. And so I feel like the more of the iceberg, right, is not just the tip now that's been exposed. So I think that when I describe my animal body experience, other people, we are all having that experience. And what we're having to do is heap more on top of that to deny it. But what it means is that it's more available to us. So that existential animal, both existential and animal level, like survival instinct, is getting louder in everybody. And so I think part of it is that there's so much existential dread going on. I mean, around the pandemic and a war and everything else, it might get lost in all that noise. But I think naming it is a relief. So that if you are in a conversation with people and you are, or people are in a conversation and somebody is able to really name articulately in a way that really cuts through those layers and speaks directly to people's hearts, really, and that deeper spiritual sense. Because even the people who walk around in the world who aren't consciously aware that they're not living their life's purpose, they know it on some level, right? So I think talking about, here's your chance to be in alignment with, put an alignment between who you really wish to be and how you're acting in the world, and framing it, and giving people pathways to doing that. I think it's those two things, and Barney and I talk about this a lot, that, drawing on these opportunities, opening that moment up, which is hard, scary, disorienting, all of that. And I can imagine that the CEO of a major bank doesn't like to feel scared and disoriented, right?
Right.
But then out of that, you create a container, right? And that's what's really interesting about some of the systems theory and change work that's going on in the world right now, that creates these models and these containers for that. And then what you do, the choices you make, don't come from a directive outside of yourself. They come from your own inner wisdom, right? But because of the knowledge and the experience that each of you bring at that executive level, you respond from that place of professional knowledge, right? That experience, it's like, what to do. You just need to have that sort of the whole ship kind of pointed in the right direction to understand where to take action.
Daylan, I think that's right. Certainly that describes how I came to this place.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that, okay, so to the extent that I could make that argument is a function of, is a function of where each person who hears it is in their spiritual journey.
That's right.
And so to give you some idea of how far afield I have to go to make my argument so that it be heard. I mean, the document that we're writing in terms of how do we view climate risk? How do we view climate change, right? Is dry is a funeral drum. There could be no hyperbole. There could be no, okay,
Yeah,
so
that's
fine.
right. Yeah.
The great news is the data is hyperbolic, right? And
Yes.
so I'm showing them that it took us 170 years, 1850 to 2020, right, to increase global surface temperatures 1.07 degrees Celsius, and just that 7% increase beyond the standard deviation that temperature has been for over 10,000 years. Just that slight deviation has created all the extreme weather events we see, including Katrina, including the heat dome, including all the fires, floods in Germany. It's on and on and on. And that's there. And that the problem, I'm showing them that just that small little deviation, and yet the warming is accelerating. That all five global model pathways say we're hitting 1.5 between 2030 and 2040.
Yeah.
And so now that's a 50% variance from the standard deviation of temperature for over 10,000 years.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's in 10 years, right? And so I'm just laying out the data, and the scientists in the IPCC reports have been, and again, this is so important. I let them know the statements out of that IPCC report, the summary for policymakers. All 195 countries who participated in that report endorsed the accuracy of these statements. So these are negotiated, watered down statements, and they're still hyperbolic.
Yes.
So one of them suggests at 1.5 degrees Celsius, we will experience a level of extreme weather events unprecedented in the historical observational record. Okay, so put your head around that for a second.
We do. Okay. This is what Barney and I put our head around all the time.
Yeah.
And so these are the arguments I'm making to them. And said, look, if you just want the facts, Joe Friday, no hyperbole, can't appeal to your inner voice, and something like that, because you wonder if these people sometimes have an inner voice. The kind of choices that they make in terms of how these businesses, how these financial institutions are run, in my journey, I asked myself,
Yeah.
to what extent are people listening to their inner voices? I'm reduced to, okay, what is the most pragmatic argument that they would make massive decisions? Because the decision we're talking about, U.S. Bank, for example, $330 billion in assets exposures in the United States. We're going to shift that. We're going to reduce all the emissions of all those credits to zero, right, by 25. That the level of change that would involve, they have to absolutely believe in why they would do that in order for them to have any chance of doing it. And that belief is unfortunately showing, giving, distilling it down. This is all within one side of one page. Here is the case. Here is where we are and where we're about to go. And it's going to be so catastrophic that you will have an opportunity to look back to this moment, because the only thing that's going to allow you to grapple with what could happen is
Yeah.
you did everything you could to prevent it. Right? And that's the
Yeah.
level of argument I'm having to give. It sounds emotional, but it's the data. The data is what so grabs you.
Well, so here's a question I have for you. So there seems to be, and this might be overly reductive. It seems like there's a couple of reasons that people would be swayed by what you're saying. One would be social responsibility.
Yeah.
The other would be fear.
Yes. Yes.
Then this
And
is sort of what I was talking about. It's like personal fear, right?
Fear.
And I think social responsibility is really fragile, because I think that, I mean, this is really just a conversation. This is not a position that Barney and I have. I mean, but I think that that social responsibility is, because it's intellectual, right? And it's a choice. And so fear of protecting your own personal stuff is, and is a greater motivator. So I was hanging out with a bunch of people with a lot of resources, and they were talking to each other about and they know all about this. They've seen all the data. They believe all the data. They're trying to figure out where they can buy land that's not going to be affected by this. Right?
How did
So
that
these are
conversation
people
go?
with enough resources that they could, and spheres of influence, that they could be impacting policy. They could be impacting others. They could be using their resources to influence, all kinds of things, right? From policy to, politics to policy to individual action. And they're looking at, well, where's the island that I can buy?
Yes.
So that's fear. They've got the fear, right? But they don't have the sense of social responsibility. But I think if you have the sense of social responsibility without the fear, your commitment to that social responsibility can be your attachment to that commitment can be swayed by something like a more primal thing, like I can make more money if I forego my social responsibility. Or it's inconvenient. Social responsibility gets inconvenient for one reason or another. So I get the question. I mean, this is an observation, but I'm curious with like that dynamic of fear and social responsibility, or you feel like there's other things that influence people's decisions, and how your experience leveraging those things. Yeah, just to respond to what I said.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I absolutely think that there's fear. There is that sense of social responsibility, which is a big thing now. So you hear it, the sustainable debt market, and you hear, everyone's ESG, environmental, social, and governance policies. All these big banks and big corporations are being judged by it. So there is a thing out there in terms of this social responsibility, though. Most people who look at it critically would say it's a bunch of greenwashing and a bunch
Sure.
of
Sure, of course.
okay,
Yeah.
so there's that issue, right? But there's also how can we make money doing this? And the perfect thing, the wonderful thing about mitigating about mitigating the warming, slowing the warming at the lowest possible part, and actually reversing it. That whole process of shifting to renewables from fossil fuels. it's going to cost, and the experts at Glasgow said about $131 trillion. Okay, McKinsey estimated it about $220 trillion. Either way, it is the biggest investment opportunity ever,
Mm, mm,
ever,
yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
all levels of capital will be able to participate in that, right? So the good news, if you need to make money, if you need to see a growth opportunity here, is that in order to get all your customers for a substantial portfolio, Bank of America, Chase, they're a $1 trillion portfolio. We're almost $400 billion. Okay, but to get all those customers to find out what their emissions are,
Hmm.
and then to get into an emissions abatement plan that can
Hmm.
transition their production process to net zero by 2050 is going to take capital.
Yeah.
That they're going to need to have a renewable source. They're going to need to be tapped into utility sources that are prepared to take on that capacity for renewable energy. All these things, they're going to have to totally change their consumption based production processes, which are designed to get you to buy more stuff instead of using your stuff longer. All
Yeah.
that has to change, and all that's going to take capital. So my argument is three-pronged: fear, and this is to the wealthiest of the wealthy, right? Elon Musk did not get us to Mars yet. The wealth is the biggest optimism I have is the wealthiest of the wealthy, the billionaires can't escape the effect that this is going to have. In other words, you can go on an island. Well, first and foremost, sea level rise.
I
The
know,
capacity
I
of going
know.
on an
It was
island.
it was
Okay,
a mind-blowing thing that I overheard. It was
right,
mind-blowing.
right. The bottom line, without going, because you know the data, is that they can't escape inaction. They're in it with the rest of us. Okay, that's the first thing. So once you get the idea that this is going to be really, really bad, right? And it's going to be really, really bad to them, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one thing. But can they do it? And is it just a loss? Is it
Yeah.
just okay? So I can no longer be a billionaire now. Because then I'm gonna whatever. I'm gonna dig a hole in the ground. I'm gonna do whatever. Okay, no. There's real economic opportunity.
Hmm.
So much so that the Glasgow Financial Group is a group of some of the largest financial institutions in the world. They committed at Glasgow to raise the $130 trillion
Wow.
in order to finance the transition. And this is Citicorp, this is Wells Fargo, this is Bank of America, this is BlackRock. I mean, all
Wow.
the usual suspects that you would not expect.
Mhm.
They are the ones who commit because they cannot escape.
Yeah.
In other words, the magnitude of the damage we're talking about, when you're talking about food supply and you're talking about access to fresh water and you're talking about mass migration and biodiversity loss and stuff like that, we have already shown that the modern economy is not very resilient, right? The modern economy can't take three Katrinas and
Right.
and 2 billion people don't have access to water.
Yeah.
And no, the economy will not function.
Yeah.
The supply
Right.
chains
It'll
will
collapse.
be
It will
broken.
collapse.
They will collapse. And so the billionaires, and any benefit you get from a modern economy is contingent on the fact that everything is functioning.
That's
If
right.
it can't function, it's Mad Max and Thunderdome. Okay,
Right.
so my argument to them at the end of the day is going to be right that no one will escape from the inaction. Two, it's going to take more capital than any growth plan that anyone has to fix this problem, and yet we have the ability to fix it, right? So therefore, let's get on board sooner rather than
Mhm.
later, right? And because the upside is a real upside. The downside is catastrophic, but the upside is to have a renewable energy world.
Mhm.
Just let that sink in for a second. To shift from a consumption-based extraction economy, where we're extracting as much natural resources, as we can almost,
Yeah.
right? Committing it to a production process that doesn't allow you to repair the goods and services, but is intent on you buying more, buying more, buying more. So therefore, you're cycling through more natural resources through the process, right? And then you're making it in such a way that it's not recyclable. So you're creating more and more waste. All that
Yeah.
has to change in order for us to achieve, the net zero and keep it well below 2 degrees Celsius, which is what the target for Paris is. To me, all that requires capital. That'll be a much better world, a much more sustainable world. And I believe that that's where the social responsibility component comes in. So
Mhm.
yes, they're scared, they can make money, and it's the right thing to do.
Mhm. Okay. Okay.
I
Thank
want
you.
to throw in something. We're gonna be running out of time, but if we do, just click back on the link again, and then we'll start the second 40-minute session. I
I'm
got
not,
a,
oh, so 40 minutes. Okay.
yeah, I got a
Okay.
notice that we're gonna shut down in 10 minutes. I don't know whether it's true or not. So if we do get shut down, just re-click this, and then we'll have a second session.
Sure.
Well, I just want to let you know that I have I have another Sunday evening meeting at 5:30.
Okay.
So I'll be able to join until about 5:15 at the latest because I need a little time in between.
Okay. So I heard, the conversation here, and these are thoughts that came up in my mind. I think the language of capitalism has made the people look, they're looking for permission to do something that act against society and the norms of society and culture. Because certainly we most people are not willing to take on the trauma of acting against the norms of society and culture. We're so monolithic, and we are so weakened in our ability to diversify how we show up in this world based on capitalistic structures. So if I think US Bank and Glasgow is in a unique position where they can become the big permission givers of change, because we don't have that social capital to act on right now because of capitalism has stripped away all that social capital. So I think US Bank is in a unique position because if you really think about this, and this is a framing that they may not like, the homes that they have underwritten and provided loans, they are static. They will end up as fuel to fire when a fire rages like Paradise, California. So they're sitting on a very high risk liability right there. So there are two things that really should incentivize US Bank. One of them is that they have enough capital, what I call institutional capital, to bring about change where we don't have enough social capital. Okay, people can operate on the lines of debt, they're thinking along debt, loss mitigation, preserving their homes, etc. So we don't have the muscle to say we have to act ethically because 2 generations from now may not live beyond 20 years old. So that's a very, what I call high construal situation where you cannot see yourself that far in the future, but you can see yourself in the future by looking at your home and say, hey, this could be Paradise, California within a year or so. So that's one of them. So US Bank is in a unique position. They have what I call institutional leverage that could replace the social capital that we lack right now in bringing change, giving permission to act against the norms of society, social and cultural norms. So that's one of them. The other one is they have a huge incentive in loss mitigation. They're sitting on assets that could be liquidated very quickly in climate change. So they're in very two unique positions right there. So where I feel that US Bank can act is that they can um, uh, take the lead in developing a community outreach change. And the community outreach change is both lifestyle, because my research has shown we have to go through a degrowth in order to buy ourselves time so that we can sequester carbon out of the air. This is not a technology that's at the scale that we can see within the next 10 to 20 years. We have to buy time. And that billions and trillions of dollars that Glasgow have set aside is to not only buy time, but to accelerate the scale and the magnitude of decarbonizing the atmosphere. So it's both. So we have to get social change of buying time. It's almost like the Titanic, where Leo DiCaprio was in the belly of the Titanic and he was locked in there. So we have to buy time so that we can slow the Titanic down and let people out so they have a better chance of surviving the future. So buying time and also developing technology to decarbonize the atmosphere. Those are the two main thrusts right there. I feel that the institutions having so much capital in their hands can play a huge role in getting those two prongs of buying time. Social change, lifestyle change basically among the masses, coordination, in a democratic coordination between institutions for change, which is changes of policies, changes of how our carbon mix in our electrical grid is, changing the electrical grid so that we can store solar and wind, etc. These are large institutional changes and policy changes, as well as political will changes. So we have to change the way that we incentivize our politics today as well. And that has to come from a democratic, what I call grassroots change right there. So if US Bank can frame from this perspective, there's a realization that it's not a technical problem per se at this point, it's the lack of courage and lack of will. And the lack of courage is the power to encounter difficult moments. And will is the power to do the right thing. And right now, the problem is so diffuse. I'll give you an example. I recently tried to partner up with Lake Oswego Sustainability Network to get this project to work with FEAR. And basically what I'm encountering is there is no established openings for me to bring the work in. So it's pretty much I have to find some way of some spy, you could say, some agent within to help me get the work into the community. But pretty much people have sewn up. They have their own version of climate action. Yeah. So it's a gated community that they are doing to assuage their guilt, to virtual signal, to make themselves feel that they have sense of autonomy when the wall is collapsing. So I got less than 1 minute. We might be kicked out, but we'll join from there.
Well, why don't we leave before we get kicked out?
Okay. And then let's
click back in.
Click back in. Okay. All right. Okay.
Well, okay. So we're going to leave again and come back. Okay.
That's
okay.
is that what? Okay.
All right.